Homeless pregnant. Lady forced to beg for money. This story is very meaningful. Everyone should hear it. Listen to Brian tell the story. I was never someone who would go out of my way to help a stranger. Life had taught me not to expect anything from anyone, and in return, I didn't offer much either. But everything changed the day I saw her. Her name was Alora, and I didn't even know she existed until the moment I saw her lying on the cold sidewalk, clutching her stomach in pain. I was walking with my friend Michael, trying to enjoy a regular day. But it all came to a halt when I heard her groaning. I had seen homeless people before, but I had never seen anyone in this condition. Pregnant, and clearly in distress. Michael, as usual, didn't think much of it. He started pulling out his phone, laughing as he planned to film the whole thing. He wanted to make a viral video, something to boost his social media. I could hear him whispering excitedly to himself, "This is going to blow up on TikTok." His words hit me like a slap in the face, but I couldn't bring myself to say anything at first. I had never been the type to confront people. Then I watched as he leaned closer to her, mocking her in the most cruel way, teasing her with words that shouldn't have been uttered to anyone, let alone someone in her state. I could see her desperation, her eyes pleading for help, but no one stopped to offer it. Michael's laughter filled the air as he recorded her struggling, and for a moment, I stood frozen, feeling like the worst kind of person for not stepping in sooner. Finally, the words that had been building up in me came pouring out. "Michael, stop it! Help her!" He looked at me, his smirk faltering just for a second, but then he scoffed and continued filming. "She's just another homeless woman, Jason. Why bother?" Those words stung, but it was what he said next that shook me to my core. "Maybe if Mom was still alive, you'd care more about people like this. But honestly, why should we help anyone who doesn't deserve it?" His words struck deep, right where it hurt the most. I couldn't shake the memory of my mother's voice in my head, telling me over and over that when you help a stranger, you might just help yourself. It had always been a mantra in our house, but hearing it now from Michael, it felt like a cruel reminder of everything I had lost. I turned away, unable to face him any longer. I had heard enough. But for some reason, I couldn't walk away from her. I walked toward the woman, feeling an unfamiliar urge to help. And just as I reached her, her water broke. Panic set in. She was in labor, and no one had stopped to help her. Not one person. "Please, don't leave me here," she whispered weakly. I knelt beside her, my heart racing as I tried to think of what to do. "I don't want my baby born in some alley." Her voice trembled, and I could feel the desperation in her words. "We'll get you to the hospital," I said, my voice sounding foreign to me. "You're going to be okay." With every step I took to get her into the car, I realized how little I knew about this woman, how little I knew about the pain she had endured. I wasn't just helping her, I was helping myself too, trying to redeem something in me that I had long buried. We finally made it to the hospital, and I watched as the doctors rushed her in, and I felt a wave of helplessness wash over me. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't even know why I was here. But something in me told me I had to stay. I had to help her. As the hours ticked by, Michael sat next to me, his impatience growing. "How much longer are we going to wait here? We don't even know her. Why are we wasting our time?" I couldn't answer him. I couldn't explain why I felt this pull, this need to stay. "You don't get it. Michael," I said finally, my voice shaking. "This woman needs help. We're here for her, and that's what matters." Michael just scoffed and leaned back in his chair, clearly over it. "Whatever, man. I'm just here because you dragged me into this. But I really don't care about some random woman. Those words, however, didn't faze me as much as they had before. Something inside me had shifted, and I couldn't go back to the person I was before. Not now. Hours passed, and the woman finally gave birth to a baby boy. A tiny thing wrapped in blankets. I watched as she looked at the baby with tears in her eyes, and I could see the fear in her face. She knew she wasn't going to make it. She had given everything for this child, and now she was letting go. "Please," she whispered, looking at me with such vulnerability. "Take care of him. He deserves a better life than I can give him." In that moment, everything clicked into place. I wasn't just helping her because I felt guilty or because it was the right thing to do. I was helping her because, for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was doing something meaningful. I was fulfilling a promise I hadn't even made yet. I stayed with the baby while the doctors tried to save her. They worked tirelessly, but I could see the inevitable in their eyes. It was over for her. And as I held that baby boy in my arms, I made a promise to myself. I would do everything I could to honor her last wish. I would raise him like my own. The days that followed were hard. I had to deal with everything, arranging for the baby's care, dealing with the hospital, and trying to manage my own emotions. I felt like a stranger to myself. My life had changed in ways I didn't expect, and I wasn't sure how to navigate it all. But then, one evening, as I sat with the baby in my arms, Michael came to me with a confession. "You know," he said, his voice serious for once, "there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have said a long time ago." I looked up at him, confused. "What is it?" "That woman. She wasn't just anyone," he said, pausing. "She was your mom's best friend. Her name was Alora, and she took care of me when I had nothing. When I was at my lowest, she was there for me. And the baby." He trailed off, looking at the child in my arms. "The baby," he continued, "was named after his father. His name is Elias." I froze, the words crashing over me. "Elias," I whispered, the truth settling in like a weight I couldn't shake off. "He's yours," Michael said softly, his eyes meeting mine. Everything changed in that moment. This wasn't just about helping a stranger. This was about family. And it wasn't just about helping someone else. It was about helping myself heal from everything I had lost. And as I looked down at Elias, I knew that everything had led me here for a reason. I wasn't just his guardian. I was his father, and I would raise him the way his mother wanted, out of love and out of hope. The world was full of uncertainty, but in that moment, I felt more certain than ever. I had found my purpose. As the days turned into weeks, I tried to make sense of everything. The hospital had done what they could, and while they couldn't save Alora, they gave me something I never expected: a second chance. Raising Elias wasn't easy. I had never been a father, and I wasn't prepared for the sleepless nights, the constant worry, or the overwhelming love that came with caring for a child. But somehow, it felt right. Every time I held him, I thought of his mother and the sacrifice she had made for him, and I knew I had to do the same. Michael, on the other hand, still couldn't quite grasp the gravity of the situation. He visited every now and then, but his heart wasn't in it. I could tell he was struggling, unsure of his role in all of this. After all, he wasn't the one who had made a promise to Alora. I was. He had no reason to feel responsible. And yet, every time I looked at him, I saw the same uncertainty I had seen in myself a few weeks ago. He didn't know what to do with all these feelings, just like I didn't. I tried to reassure him, but I knew he wasn't ready to take on the responsibility. He was still too caught up in his own life, in the mess he had made of things. Still, I couldn't help but hope that one day he would come around, that one day he would understand why this all mattered. Elias was growing quickly, his little hands reaching for everything, his eyes full of wonder. There were moments when I would look at him and feel like I wasn't doing enough. I'd never been a parent before. I had no experience, and now I was supposed to raise this child, to love him, to guide him through life. It was a lot to take in. But then, in the quiet of the night, when everything was still, I'd hold him close and tell him that he was loved, that I would do whatever it took to make sure he was okay. And somehow, that felt enough. The love I had for him was the one thing that didn't require instructions. It was instinctual, raw, and real. It wasn't long before I started noticing changes in myself. I wasn't as angry as I used to be. I didn't feel the same bitterness that had once consumed me. The constant fight inside me, against myself, against life, began to fade. It wasn't because everything was perfect, far from it. But there was something about Elias that made me want to be better. He reminded me of the things I had forgotten about myself, the things that had mattered before everything fell apart. One day, Michael came over, and for the first time in weeks, he seemed genuinely interested in Elias. I watched as he carefully picked him up, his usual cocky demeanor replaced by something softer, more vulnerable. It was almost as if he didn't know how to interact with the baby, but he was trying. I could see the effort. "He's growing fast," Michael said, his voice quieter than usual. "It's hard to believe he's the same baby we brought into the hospital." I nodded, watching him hold Elias with a tenderness I hadn't expected. For a moment, I saw a glimpse of what could be, a future where we weren't just two people trying to navigate through life, but a family, united by the love we had for this little boy. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing. I was done running from my past. I was done hiding behind excuses, behind the idea that I couldn't change. The day I held Elias for the first time, I made a promise. Not just to Alora, but to myself. I would be the man I had always wanted to be. I would be the father Elias needed, and I would make sure he knew how much he was loved, no matter what. Michael seemed to sense the shift in me, too. He didn't say much, but I could tell he was processing everything in his own way. Maybe, just maybe, he was beginning to understand why helping people was so important. The weeks that followed weren't easy. There were times when I felt overwhelmed, when I didn't know if I was making the right decisions. But with every challenge, I found strength I didn't know I had. And with every smile from Elias, I remembered why I was doing this. I wasn't just helping him, he was helping me. One evening, as I was sitting with Elias, watching him fall asleep in my arms, I thought back to the moment I had first met Alora, the moment I had decided to help her, not knowing what would come of it. And in that moment, I realized something important. When you help a stranger, you just might help yourself. That was the truth that had guided me all along, and it was the truth that would carry me forward. It didn't matter what had happened in the past, or how lost I had been. What mattered now was that I had a purpose. I had Elias, and together we would face whatever came next, with love, with hope, and with the promise that we would always be there for each other. As the days turned into months, the world outside continued to move at its usual pace, while inside our small home, everything had changed. I found myself adapting to this new life, one where every moment revolved around Elias. He was no longer just a child I was looking after out of obligation. He was my son, in every sense of the word. I had gone from barely knowing what to do with him, to learning the intricacies of parenting. The sleepless nights, the endless diaper changes, the sick days where you could do nothing but hold them close. And somehow, It felt like I was finally getting the hang of it. But there were moments when doubt crept in. When I'd find myself looking at Elias, wondering if I was truly enough for him. Was I doing this right? Would I be able to provide him with the kind of life he deserved? I had no answers, but I made a silent promise to him every night. I promised him that I would never leave him. I promised that I would give him everything I never had, and more. Even if I didn't know the way, I'd find it. For him. One evening, as I sat in the living room with Elias asleep in my lap, Michael came by unexpectedly. He had started visiting more often, a change I hadn't anticipated. He seemed to be coming around, slowly but surely. I was still unsure of what exactly had changed in him, but I saw glimpses of a different side of him now. He wasn't as reckless, as distant as before. He had begun to help out with Elias, even if just in small ways, like bringing groceries or holding him for a few minutes while I got some rest. "He's getting big," Michael remarked, looking down at Elias with a soft smile. "I can't believe how fast he's growing. Feels like just yesterday we were in that hospital room." I glanced up at him, taking in the sincerity in his voice. "Yeah, he's a lot of work, but he's worth it." There was a pause, and for a moment I thought he might say something dismissive, but instead he spoke in a quiet tone. "Do you ever think about her?" he asked, his eyes flickering toward the photo of Alora on the mantel. "Your mom's friend, I mean." The question hit me harder than I expected. It was a part of me that I had kept buried, but there was no denying the impact Alora had had on my life. And, in a way, on Michael's life, too. She had shown us both that there was more to life than just surviving. It was about helping others, even when it didn't make sense. "I think about her every day," I admitted, feeling a lump form in my throat. "She gave me more than I ever thought I could give. And now, raising Elias, I'm just trying to live up to what she would have wanted." Michael nodded, his expression softer than usual. "You're doing a good job, Jason. A really good job." His words caught me off guard. I wasn't used to hearing praise from him. It wasn't that he wasn't capable of being kind, but it had never been his way. This change in him, it wasn't just about helping Elias. It was like he was starting to come to terms with everything. His past, his mistakes, and maybe even his own future. After a long silence, he spoke again. "I want to be more involved, you know? With Elias. I don't know if I'll ever be a father to him the way you are, but I'd like to be someone he can count on." I looked at Michael, trying to process what he was saying. I had never imagined him stepping up like this. But there it was. "I think he'd like that," I said softly. We both would. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't help but think back to everything that had led me here. The chaos, the pain, the heartache. It had all felt so overwhelming at the time. But now, with Elias asleep beside me, I could see the purpose behind it all. Alora had been right when she said that helping a stranger might just help yourself. I had been a stranger to myself for so long, lost in a world of bitterness and regret. But now, with Elias, I was finding pieces of who I was meant to be. The next few months were filled with ups and downs, as we continued to adjust to our new lives. Michael's visits became more frequent, and slowly I began to notice the way he interacted with Elias. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. He would help with feeding, or take him for walks around the neighborhood. It was the little things, but to me, it meant a lot. He was learning to care, learning to be part of something bigger than himself. One day, as I was watching Michael play with Elias in the yard, I felt a sense of pride I hadn't expected. There was still so much we didn't know, so much we hadn't figured out. But for the first time, I felt like we were a family. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that was all I could ask for. "Hey," Michael called out, grinning as Elias giggled in his arms. "Look at this, Jason. I think I'm finally getting the hang of this fatherhood thing." I laughed, feeling a warmth spread through me. "Yeah, you're doing great." It was then that I realized how far we had all come. We had started as strangers, people who had no reason to care about each other. But now, we were family. And as I looked at Michael, at Elias, I knew we had built something solid, something unbreakable. It wasn't about the past, it wasn't about mistakes or regrets. It was about the future. And with that future, we had all found something we hadn't even known we were searching for. And in that moment, I understood. Sometimes, when you help a stranger, you end up helping yourself. And maybe, just maybe, that's all we really need in life. The story we've just explored is one of transformation, redemption, and the power of human connection. At its core, it's a reminder that sometimes the most unexpected people can change our lives in ways we never saw coming. Jason was a man lost in his own struggles, living a life of bitterness and isolation. But through the simple act of helping a stranger, he found his purpose. He became a father, not just to Elias, but to himself. Reclaiming pieces of his humanity he thought he'd lost forever. There's a powerful lesson in Alora's words. When you help a stranger, you might just help yourself. It's not just about the act of kindness. It's about the ripple effect it creates in our hearts and lives. Jason's journey wasn't easy. He stumbled, he doubted, but he kept going. And in the process, he found that the love he gave out was the same love he needed to heal. This story is a call to us all. To be kind, to offer help even when it feels difficult, to be the change we want to see. Because, as we saw with Jason, even the smallest gesture can shift the course of a life. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever helped someone who you thought you had no reason to help, only to find that it changed you in the process? Or maybe you've been in a place where you needed help, but found it in the most unexpected of ways. Share your thoughts with me. How has kindness, in its many forms, shaped your life? Drop a comment. Let's start a conversation and see how far these ripples of kindness can reach.